Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from Sydney, Australia, Dr. Isabella Allan. Isabella, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's just delightful to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Allan is a negotiation expert, and she has a forthcoming book. And all of you know I'm always very partial to authors. So she's got a forthcoming book titled Negotiating with EQ. So Isabella, before we start talking about negotiations and emotional intelligence, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Well, I should actually just kick off with saying kia ora. I come from New Zealand, or Aotearoa originally, and I'm here in Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation here in Australia. And it's part of our process of always acknowledging where we have come from and what land we're standing on. So I would say my journey has been negotiate all the way. So if I look at my original profession, which was as an urban and regional planner, negotiating how we use land and ensuring that we actually have some balance in that sustainability lens has been throughout my entire career. I've held senior executive roles from chief executive officer right through to head of environment group during a telecommunications rollout that enabled the internet that we're using today to talk across the globe. And I've also been a leadership development trainer facilitator, and I've had the delight of actually working with senior leaders as they build their case to actually negotiate an outcome with another party. And I've also worked with low resource countries in how we actually come together and network to actually build a better place of the future as well. So I reckon I've covered a lot.
What an amazing journey. What an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing this. So let's talk about negotiation. Can you describe the concept of negotiating with emotional intelligence and its importance in business today?
So many people think that negotiation should actually be very controlled and we've got a process and there should be no emotions involved. But I actually think that if we take some of those words that we hear around the place, like, for instance, in the share market, the sentiment that the share market feels, it's all about emotion. Or if we realize that you've got to have the deadpan face when you come to actually negotiate that final issue, what we're actually reflecting is that emotions get in the way of negotiation all the time. So how we become intelligent in the way that we use emotions so that we can hear and listen and understand where the other side is coming from, but most importantly, know when they get in the way and how we can adjust them. So that intelligence level is really important, because if we don't control our emotions, we can become forgetful. We don't understand and listen to the other side's issues. We're able to come up with innovative ideas, and then we actually don't get a win-win outcome that is best for both sides.
Fascinating. Yeah. And what, in your view, are some of the common misconceptions about negotiation?
Well, negotiation, people think they can go into it without planning. And we do need to plan. And we also need to start to think about what is it that we wish to get and what is it going to be as a trigger to walk away. But when I talk with so many of my clients about what's stopping them from negotiating well, they point out that they have this kind of fear of success, this fear of failure. And those things we kind of wrap up now into the imposter syndrome, and both men and women experience imposter syndrome. So I think those are some of the things that we need to actually unpack when we're together talking about negotiation, because they are some of the things that get in the way of a negotiation.
And just to continue with what you just mentioned, what would you say are some common pitfalls when it comes to emotions in negotiation?
Well, I think it is that it's that lack of prep, that lack of preparation, and also therefore our avoidance of practicing. So if we want to get over that imposter syndrome, we need to actually firstly understand the principles of negotiation and really what it is that we're bringing to the table and our philosophy of negotiation. And then we need to practice. And so simulations are really helpful to really test how we're coming across in a safe environment, and then also getting feedback. Because if we've actually practiced, then we build our confidence, and that helps us get over that imposter syndrome, that fear of not really good at what I'm doing.
Right. Well said. And, it's often been said how important body language is when you go into a negotiation. But I wanted to understand from you, how does emotional intelligence impact negotiation outcomes?
Yes. Oh, awesome question. So we know that there's about 7 observable behaviors that we have as an individual, and we can adjust some of those. So, for example, a really easy one is to think about, how are we dressing for the interaction. But we need to also be very aware as to the important nuance that goes on. And, I'll probably use the word nuance quite a bit as we're in conversation. Because if we're not in control of our emotions, it can have an impact on our voice. And so we stop breathing, then we stop thinking, it comes out in our voice, we might get quavery in our voice. And if we know that we're actually dealing with another party that is pretty dogmatic and very strong and quite angry in their approach, that can give them a bit of a signal that, in fact, oh, okay, we've got them in a corner, and then they may actually continue to ramp up the competitive behavior. So our ability to actually control our emotions and our anger, our fear, our concerns, and therefore be in control. Basically, it's having a perspective of, am I in state ready for this negotiation? If we're in that kind of control, then those observable behaviors will start to actually work for us. And we send so many signals to the other side as we're in negotiation. It's really quite profound. And those things end up helping us build trust or destroying trust as well.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is about bias. How does bias influence decision-making in negotiations? And how can bias be mitigated?
Well, I quite love looking at bias and understanding how we can de-bias. So my PhD actually looked at the bias in decision makings when we're making decisions about sustainability. And look, there's over 250 different identified bias, if we can call it that. We've got so many biases. They're rules of thumbs or heuristics that we've learned over time to help us shortcut the enormous amount of information that comes our way. So bias can be helpful, but it can also be really unhelpful. And there's a couple that I think are really important for our listeners today to realize. So confirmation bias is one that really gets in the way. When we feel that, this person is angry and they're going to be really competitive, we're going to search for examples that prove that point. And we'll keep on searching for them to confirm our bias, that is the perspective that the other person is bringing to the table, where in fact it could be completely wrong. We can actually have an anchoring process in the decision-making process, and that's where one person will actually speak up first and anchors at a certain point. And of course, the really, really big one is the liking bias that gets in the way all the time. So do I like this person and are they like me? Because I'm probably going to interact with them in a very different way as compared to somebody that I don't know or I haven't spent the time getting to know them. So they're just a couple of the 250 odd biases that are out there that get in the way.
Fascinating. Yeah. And I'm sure you will be covering a lot of these in your forthcoming book as well.
Yes. Yeah. Because they impact how we influence the conversation and also how we actually look at our best alternative to a negotiated agreement and decide to walk away. So we need to be very aware of bias and how we can actually unpick that bias and try something different.
And my next question for you is that what is the role of empathy in understanding the other person's point of view. And some people often say empathy could also be seen as a sign of weakness.
Yes, and it's very unfortunate that people perceive that being empathetic is a sign of weakness. In fact, it is more graceful in its approach rather than the angry competitive side of things.
Right.
And empathy is really understanding where the other side is coming from. And we know all of the negotiation experts, the shoulders of giants that we stand on have always explained if you understand what the other side's issues are, plus also your own, then you're going to have a much better outcome for both sides. And so empathy is an absolute key tool to negotiation rather than a sign of weakness. So I think we need to flip our perspective on that word empathy, because I think it's a very powerful thing rather than a negative.
Well said. And, when you go into a negotiation meeting, what techniques do you use to build rapport in a meeting?
Yes. Well, I believe that negotiation actually starts well before the actual key thing that we call a negotiation. It comes right back to the point where we start to meet somebody, our honesty, how we build our trust, how we build that rapport, particularly if it's with a client or with our colleagues at work, and how we continue to actually be consistent in our behavior towards that person. Because if we flip because we're in negotiation, then that actually starts to pull at the strings of trust. And trust is an absolutely crucial element of negotiation.
Right.
But the research does tell us that, in fact, we get quite overwhelmed by negotiation. And so sometimes we're going to stretch the truth. And so lying can be something that gets in the way. And once a lie begins, it has a snowball effect. So that's where that element of building trust, building rapport right at the beginning is important. And from my perspective, I think it's being authentic, knowing exactly what it is that you would like to have as an outcome, being as open as you possibly can, because sometimes there are things that you don't want to reveal too early, but you may need to, and being consistent all the way through. So showing up when you say you're going to show up, thinking about the place where negotiations are going to be held, all of those kinds of environments. And in fact, the breaking of bread is a really crucial part of the negotiation as well. There's a myriad of things that can help build with rapport.
Well said. And the other aspect of a negotiation also is the ability to read and respond to non-verbal cues. Part of it could be body language. How would you, as a negotiator, effectively read and respond to these non-verbal cues?
Yes. So I think one of the best books on this is for your listeners to actually have a little bit of a dive into is about by Paul Ekman. And then it's been followed on by David Matsumoto to look at micro expressions.
Right.
Just to let you know that this particular work is really important. It demonstrates the universal emotions that we have around the world, and I'll get to that in a moment. More importantly, it has been used as the basis of the theory for facial recognition. So we know now that AI is reading our faces on a regular basis. So the nonverbal cues that are given across our face, if we just look at that, because of course we're in this very intense environment here, we can't see anything below here kind of thing. We deliver it through our eye contact, the level of smiles, of course, the voice and all those kinds of things. But there can actually be little micro expressions, and this is David Matsumoto's work, which is awesome work, where we will give a little flick of a suggestion of surprise or anger when something comes and is delivered to us. And experts in this are really good at being able to see where those micro expressions are delivered. And so you can actually do a test online to actually develop your skill set in this. But Paul Ekman, his theory, he set out to actually test that there were no universal emotions. He believed that there never were. And so in the 70s, he decided to head from New York with a group of photos of New Yorkers with facial expressions like surprise, anger, and he took them into Papua New Guinea. And Papua New Guinea at that time definitely had not experienced the modern world. And he took it into the highlands of Papua New Guinea and sat with the village chiefs and senior people. And he got them to explain what was the expression that was being demonstrated in these photographs, and to also do a similar facial pull to demonstrate that word. He then took those photos from PNG back to New York and got those people to describe the word. And that's where he started to realize surprise and surprise matched, anger and anger matched. And he came up with about 5 or 6 that he realized were universal. So people could read each other. So that's where this is really fascinating to look at. How can you develop a skill in micro expressions? Because when we hear something, we have a whole bunch of things go on inside us, and we have a little micro expression that if we're good at reading it, we can actually improve the way we go, hey, let's just pause there for a moment. Do we need to explore this a little bit further rather than just moving on because we're time poor or something like that?
What a great response. Thank you so much. My next question, Isabella, is on back to emotional intelligence. How can emotional intelligence contribute to long-term relationship building in business?
Well, I think Daniel Goleman's work in the 90s really started to unpack, and of course he coined the word emotional intelligence. And what it helps us do is it helps us reason better, which means we make better decisions. It also means that we're open to hearing other things, and we're more creative. So when we know that we need to be innovative in our organizations, we also need to actually have higher emotional intelligence. Look, I work with executives, coaching them, and also in a training environment. And so sometimes I am actually pulled into one-to-one conversations with people where they're just overwhelmed with what's going on around them at work. And I think sometimes when we talk about negotiation, we think about the big contract with our clients. And what we have to realize is that when we're at work, we are negotiating at work all the time. And it's long-term business relationships internally, as well as with our clients, that are really important. And we've got Dorothy Kolb and Jessica Porter that coined the term small N negotiation for negotiating at work situation. And so I like to say small N negotiation for negotiating at work, thinking about those points where you're actually going, look, I've got to work with my colleagues for the next 5, 10 years. Thinking about our clients, not losing the big negotiation, because we want to keep that client for the long term, because we know that it takes a lot more effort to win new clients. And the most important thing coming down the line is ecosystem partnerships. The growth of partnerships, global partnerships, is going to be phenomenal. And in fact, over the next 5 years, 85 to 90% of senior leaders say they're going to develop an ecosystem partnership in coming years. And so I call that networked partnerships. So how do we bring organizations together to actually work out what is it that we can do together that it will grow a sector? And this is my current area of research as well. So I'm quite excited about that side of things.
But tell me, can emotional intelligence be effectively taught?
Yes.
Or are you born with it?
No, it definitely can be taught. And so we do have tools that are out there. There's about 3. I use a tool that is a global tool that has been validated and is extremely reliable. There's some other tools that have now got a little bit more, question marks around them. I won't mention those, but a really good tool, an emotional intelligence tool, will actually help you do a test 1, do some training, do some coaching, do some feedback with a really good expert, and then do a test 2 to actually stretch that you've got in your emotional intelligence. So that's all built on Daniel Goleman's work from the early days. But we're now able to really build on the fact that we've got this global database that demonstrates how people and leaders have been able to shift when they've worked on their emotional intelligence.
Well said. So I have time for 3 more questions for you. My next question, Isabella, is that what advice would you give to women in leadership positions to enhance their negotiation skills?
Awesome. Oh, favorite subject area for me.
Okay.
Look, I think many organizations are shifting to a really collaborative approach to working. And we've seen a 50% increase since 2016-ish in collaboration being core to organizations.
Right.
I say that you can't collaborate well unless you negotiate well. And it is crucial for women to understand the skills of negotiation, particularly small N negotiation, how you negotiate at work. And the reason being is because we find that more women are involved in the collaborative process. What do I mean by that? Rob Cross did a study, and his document, his paper is in the Harvard Business Review. And what he found was that gents are actually going to get involved in collaboration. And the value add that comes from collaboration is delivered by 5% of employees. And those 5% employees are primarily women. The men, when they get involved, is they are providing advice, very different from getting in with the boots and all, getting involved in the collaboration. So there's advice giving and there's actually helping others. And so then Huffington Post did some research, and what they found was that when men stay late to actually help others, they have a 14% increase in the way that they're perceived by others in their organization compared to women who might do the same. So you might find both men and women might stay back late, but the guys are actually getting the reflection of, oh, that's awesome that they did that. And so women need to actually negotiate their value. How are they actually sharing information about what they have achieved? And so it's moving beyond that imposter syndrome, and also being very clear as to their boundaries that they wish to get involved in and what are they going to walk away from, and being aware of the yes and no when they actually take on board a new project, because sometimes we need to be able to articulate what is it expected of me when I join this project of collaboration, particularly because women have a tendency to step in and do a whole lot more.
Absolutely.
So I think that the skill of negotiation is absolutely crucial for all women. And I'd really encourage you to, for all the women that are listening, see if you can find a woman who has been involved in real live negotiations, because we perceive things in a very different way. Most of the trainers and facilitators in negotiation are gents, and they're going to have a very different approach than we bring to the table. So
very interesting. And my last question to you, Isabel, and I can't possibly end this without talking about your forthcoming book, Negotiating with EQ. Tell me a little bit about your forthcoming book. What were some of your hypotheses when you wrote it, and when do you expect it to be available for people to buy it?
It'll definitely be out at the end of this year. And the hypothesis, the question that I was taking to my thinking was, why are we reluctant to think about emotional intelligence in negotiation? And, you know, it triggers all sorts of stories that I share in the book, such as we have in some countries a fascination about putting Botox into our face. And there's and we can track the reason why Botox became important was actually the guys dealing in New York who were dealing with very big contracts, and they wanted to actually have the deadpan face, and so they found Botox, and of course that's been cosmetic world in a different way. But why have we been avoiding emotions, and how can we intelligently take them on board in negotiation. So this is very much the argument about why we need to embrace our emotions in an appropriate way, setting up boundaries, understanding what we would like to actually get from a negotiation, but also the triggers for walk away. And then stories, of course, where I'm demonstrating where this is successfully used. And I'd be delighted if your listeners are eager to find out more. They can always jump onto my website and find out more and join my community, because I find, and no doubt, Ash, when you've had your books released, you like to actually bring together a group of people for a masterclass, just to actually take them through the ins and outs of the book. So I'd be delighted if people are interested in joining.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I'm sure, would you like to give us your website also?
Yes, it's simply isabellaallan.com. And so the Allan is ALLAN. Right. So join me for the my weekly report, and it's there that I start to share some of the insights from the book as well. And then masterclasses.
Fascinating. I'm going to sign up for your newsletter. And on that note, Isabella, thank you so much for speaking to me about negotiation, to use your own term. I've learned many of the nuances of negotiation from you today. Thank you for speaking to me about biases. I think there is, biases is such a critical aspect of negotiation. And, we sometimes go in with blinkers on our eyes into a negotiation and then come away feeling, we wish we hadn't done that. Thank you also for speaking to me about your book. I learned what really got Botox started for men to keep a deadpan face. That's a big learning again for me. But thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.